All right, guys, we are back with another reaction. Now we have the Napoleonic Wars, the Peninsular War, 1809 to 1811. All right, it'll be in Spain, apparently. That's where we're going. The last time we were visited Spain, did not bode well for the French. They were having some problems with the Spanish kind of revolt, I guess. France came in, took over, said, we're the boss now. Spain's like, oh, no, this ain't good. And, it's like, okay, you don't support the Catholic Church. We do. You're kind of like a foreign invader. You're arrogant. You're just kind of bleh. And so now we're going to see what happens here. The title card had the Spanish Ulcer. So I'm guessing it's maybe a little painful for Napoleon. So we'll continue here. This war was my downfall. Okay, so.
In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte, Emperor of the French, was at the height of his power. He had just won another crushing victory against Austria at Wagram and imposed a humiliating peace treaty. But the war he'd started in Spain and Portugal, with his ill-judged invasion the previous year, continued to rage. Napoleon had placed his own brother, Joseph, on the Spanish throne, uniting a proud country against him.
Yep.
His troops had dealt ruthlessly with popular uprisings, while routing a succession of Spanish armies. In February 1809, Marshal Lannes overcame the heroic defense of Zaragoza in a brutal siege that cost 54,000 Spanish lives.
Whoa,
and 10,000 French.
54,000?
Still, the Spanish and Portuguese remained defiant. And 3 months after their escape from Coruña, the British were back. In April, Sir Arthur Wellesley landed in Lisbon to lead a small Anglo-Portuguese army.
Gotta say, man, the Spanish and Portuguese got some really strong, will. Really strong will to fight as hard as 54,000 people, or Spanish, at Zaragoza. That's a lot of people, man. That's crazy. And I'm looking from the picture. I don't know if that was that the picture, or that artwork from like that siege. It was just like civilians. There's even a priest or something, like, to think of that, defending your town and stuff. I don't think a lot of people, especially maybe nowadays, would even have that sort of willpower to do that, So I got to give it to the Spanish and the Portuguese.
British redcoats would fight alongside Portuguese troops, who, with the help of British training, would soon prove themselves highly effective.
All right, lads, let's go.
3 weeks after arriving in Portugal, Wellesley moved against Marshal Soult's Second Corps, which had recently taken Porto. Soult and his troops, preoccupied with plundering the region, had no warning of the British advance, and were soon in headlong retreat, back through the mountains into Spain.
We're large. Okay, wow.
Having
That's
secured
quite the quote
Portugal
there.
for the time being, Wellesley planned a joint campaign with General Cuesta, commanding the Spanish army of Extremadura.
Okay.
On the 10th of July, the two commanders met at Casas de Miravete to discuss strategy. Relations between these two allies were not straightforward.
Yeah, they hate each
Spain
other, don't
and
they?
Britain had a long history of conflict. The Spanish were deeply suspicious of British intentions in Spain, while the British had a low opinion of the Spanish army, which they considered poorly trained and badly led. Wellesley's request to take over command of Spanish forces was rejected, but the generals agreed to a joint advance up the Tagus Valley towards Madrid. to be supported by General Venegas, advancing from La Mancha.
Okay, little teamwork.
In the face of their advance, Marshal Victor's First Corps withdrew to Talavera, where he was joined by King Joseph and General Sebastiani's Fourth Corps. The French plan was for Joseph's army to defend Madrid, while Marshal Soult led 3 corps down from the north to get behind and trap the Anglo-Spanish forces. But Joseph, worried by Soult's slow progress and General Venegas's advance on Madrid, decided to attack at Talavera.
Okay. "30,000 British troops, some 150 leagues from the sea, against 100,000 of the best troops in the world. My God." Yeah, I mean, we haven't really seen the British Army tested that much. How much is a league, by the way? 150 leagues? Is that a long distance?
The Battle of Talavera saw British infantry bear the brunt of the French assault. They stood firm and repelled the enemy with disciplined musket fire and bayonet charges.
Okay.
Talavera was a small battle compared to the great clashes fought that year in Austria. But it proved that under Wellesley, Britain's small, well-drilled army was a force to be reckoned with, even though in the short term, victory achieved little.
Well,
Warned of Soult's approach from captured dispatches, the victorious Anglo-Spanish army retreated, while King Joseph and Fourth Corps marched against Venegas's army, which they smashed at the Battle of Almonacid. That autumn, the Supreme Junta in Seville, Free Spain's effective government, raised 2 new armies for another attempt to liberate Madrid, planning to converge on the capital from north and south.
okay.
But Wellesley, ennobled as Viscount Wellington for his victory at Talavera, had been so disgusted by the lack of Spanish cooperation that summer that he refused to risk his army.
Well, fair enough.
Predictably, Spain's inexperienced armies met with disaster. At Ocaña, they suffered their biggest defeat of the war, when a smaller force under Marshal Soult routed the Spanish army, taking 14,000 prisoners and 50 cannon.
Ooh.
A week later, the army of the left was heavily defeated at Alba de Tormes. There was more bad news when Girona fell to the French after an epic 7-month siege. The Supreme Junta's plans to retake Madrid were in tatters, and southern Spain was now wide open to French attack.
Okay. So they're doing work here. "My object is not to obtain submission by force, but to dispel illusions. I will arrive at a union of hearts." Joseph Bonaparte. Okay, so basically hearts and minds type tactics. Maybe, I don't know, like trying to convince people that you're better than what they had.
In January 1810, King Joseph marched south with an army of 60,000 men. Spanish resistance evaporated. Spain's Supreme Junta was overthrown in a coup, as Córdoba and Seville fell without a fight. Joseph, who still hoped to win over the Spanish with his progressive reforms, was welcomed by many as a savior from anarchy. Only Cadiz held out, its defenses reinforced by a British naval squadron, and was besieged by Victor's First Corps. Meanwhile, Napoleon sent Marshal Massena to Spain with 65,000 reinforcements. He was reckoned one of Napoleon's best marshals, and had just been made Prince of Essling for his heroics in the recent war against Austria. Massena was to lead a third French invasion of Portugal, take Lisbon, and chase the British back into the sea.
Okay.
He laid siege to Ciudad Rodrigo, a fortified city controlling one of the main routes into Wellington, with only 33,000 men to face Massena's 50,000, retreated. Massena crossed the Portuguese frontier and besieged Almeida. After just 13 hours of bombardment, a lucky French shot hit the Portuguese magazine. 70 tons of gunpowder went up in a devastating explosion.
My God, that must have been quite the frickin' rumble. I'm sure people felt that a ways away, or heard it a ways away. If this painting is accurate, I mean, that's just annihilating. That's crazy.
That made all further resistance useless.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
It was a serious blow to Wellington, who'd been relying on Almeida's strong defences to buy him time. At Busaco, he found a strong defensive position and made a stand. Massena's uphill frontal attack failed, at a cost of 4,000 casualties. But the next day, the French found a way to outflank Wellington's position, and his retreat continued. As Massena's army neared Lisbon, his scouts reported something completely unexpected.
Oh boy.
Stretching across the Lisbon Peninsula, protecting the city from attack, they found a new chain of fortifications in two major lines. Known as the Lines of Torres Vedras, the British and Portuguese had been constructing these defences for more than a year.
Dang.
Now the lines bristled with more than 100 forts, redoubts and batteries, manned by 30,000 troops and 250 guns.
That's wild, man. So there was no way, like, at this time, did, like, these powers have, like, spies or anything in, like, the other side's armies and stuff? There was, like, no way to know that this was being built for over a year? I mean, I know it's pretty far into Portugal and stuff, like, obviously the British control the sea. But, like, it's just strange that you would walk up on this massive two-line fortification and you had no idea it was there.
Massena soon discovered the lines were far too strong for him to attack. What's more, a scorched earth strategy had stripped the surrounding countryside of anything that might help the French. While Portuguese partisans attacked French supply columns as they struggled through the mountains to reach Massena's army. Massena faced a grim predicament. Starved of supplies, too weak to attack, unwilling to retreat. But throughout this standoff, it was Portuguese peasants who suffered most of all. When their villages and farms were burned, many took refuge in Lisbon, where thousands died of starvation and disease.
I mean, that's basically how it always goes, isn't it? I mean, even in modern day wars, like even the conflicts of today, it's typically the civilians that suffer the most. It's not like, the upper echelon of people, the wealthy, or like the nobles, or the leadership. It's typically the lower class, the peasants, the serfs, the people who just common folk. They're the ones who always get the brunt of it. So, Prince of Essling, you are no longer Massena. Oh. That doesn't sound good.
Back in France, Napoleon had been preoccupied with his divorce from the Empress Josephine, and then a new marriage to Archduchess Marie-Louise, daughter of the Emperor of Austria.
I thought that, maybe I'm misremembering, but in the coup video, didn't they say that she would be like, Josephine would be, like faithful and stuff like that? What happened? They just didn't want to be together anymore? But I guess I can see why he would marry the daughter of the Austrian emperor, to kind of like make their two kingdoms more, aligned together. But anybody want to fill me on what happened with Josephine? Like, I thought that was supposed to be their infidelities or whatever were resolved. I guess not.
She was now expecting their first child. Nevertheless, from Paris, Napoleon sent frequent orders to his marshals in Spain and Portugal, urging them to take more aggressive action. But when these orders arrived weeks later, they were usually out of date and showed little understanding of the problems his marshals faced. He now ordered Soult, based in Andalusia, to go on the offensive to draw enemy forces away from Lisbon, so Massena could take the city. Soult laid siege to Badajoz, a fortified city that controlled the southern route into Portugal. When 12,000 men of the army of Extremadura marched to its relief, they were routed by Soult, after which the city tamely surrendered, giving up 8,000 prisoners and vast quantities of stores. It was another heavy blow to Spain's armed forces.
Yeah.
But remarkably, despite such disasters and their many blundering generals, the Spanish troops remained willing to fight, the courage of the rank and file undimmed.
All right, men, let's go. Big shout out to the Spanish here. Let's go. Keep fighting. I mean, I know it's hard to say. I mean, obviously, if you were in an army or whatever, and you keep losing and losing and losing, and your like leaders seem like they're just totally oblivious, it might be hard to keep going forward because you're just wondering what's the point. You know, I'm just going to lose again because we have really stupid generals. But it's, you know, the rank and file, the regular soldier, if they're willing to fight, you still have a chance, you know.
Victor's First Corps, besieging Cadiz, had now been so weakened to support other operations that the Anglo-Spanish garrison decided to attack. The Allies landed along the coast to strike at the French siege lines from the rear. But they were ambushed by the French at Barossa. Despite heavy losses, the Anglo-Portuguese rearguard fought off the enemy, but a furious falling out between British commander Sir Thomas Graham and his Spanish counterpart General La Peña threw away any advantage.
Dang.
Soult, alarmed at these developments, marched back to Andalusia. Meanwhile, Massena, out of food and with no prospect of reinforcement, had no option but to retreat. Wellington's army pursued, discovering evidence of several appalling atrocities committed by the French against Portuguese villagers. There were running battles with the French rearguard, brilliantly commanded by Marshal Ney, until he was sacked by Massena for criticizing his leadership.
Oh, okay, that
Having
seems
chased
dumb.
the French out of Portugal, Wellington besieged Almeida. Massena's army, now rested and reinforced, marched to its aid. The two armies clashed again at Fuentes de Oñoro. In 2 days of heavy fighting, Massena failed to break through Wellington's position to relieve Almeida. The fortress fell the next week, but to Wellington's fury, British bungling allowed most of the French garrison to escape. Massena had lost 25,000 men in Portugal. Now he'd lost Almeida too, and a string of bad decisions, not least to bring his mistress with him on campaign, had cost him the respect of his officers.
Bro, I understand. I get it. You want to have her there for comfort in whatever way, shape, or form that takes. But come on, man. We got a war to win here. You're bringing your mistress with you. And all your officers are going to be like, well, what about us? You know, we don't have anybody.
The Marshal, whom Napoleon had once nicknamed the Dear Child of Victory, was recalled to France in disgrace, never to hold senior command again.
Really? So he's just relieved of command forever? Like he never is in any more battles? Because I mean, he'd been with from the start. He was in the Italy one. Like he was doing work. Like the guy has skill. So like, what's going on here?
Napoleon sent Marshal Marmont to replace him.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Marshal Beresford, the British commander of Portugal's army, was sent to retake Badajoz with 20,000 British and Portuguese troops. When Soult approached with a relief force, Beresford marched to meet him at Albuera. It was one of the bloodiest battles of the war. Around 6,000 casualties on each side, with more than a third of the British infantry killed, wounded or captured. Marshal Soult declared,
"There is no beating these troops, in spite of their generals. I always thought they were bad soldiers. Now I'm sure of it. I had turned their right, pierced their center, and everywhere victory was mine. But they didn't know how to run."
Oh, wow. That's a great quote. They're just basically saying the British had courage. I mean, they showed solidarity, they showed courage with each other. They didn't turn tail and run. On a side note, this guy sounds like the person narrating this sounds like the like a person you'd hear on like Age of Empires. Maybe we play that game. Great series of games. Just kind of reminded me of that.
Soult had been checked, but he was determined to save Badajoz. The newly arrived Marshal Marmont marched to his aid, and they advanced again. This combined army forced the British to abandon the siege. But when Wellington withdrew to a strong defensive position across the Portuguese border, Soult and Marmont did not pursue. French commanders in Spain had learned grudging respect for Wellington and for the steadiness of his troops. For now, the war in Spain had entered stalemate.
Well, that's not good if you don't want to see that in your barracks.
While British, French and Spanish armies crisscrossed Spain and Portugal, another war was fought every day in the mountains, hills and woods. From 1808, Spanish and Portuguese civilians, militias and ex-soldiers began taking up arms against the hated French invader. They waged a war of ambushes and hit-and-run raids, known in Spanish as La Guerrilla, the Little War.
Guerrilla.
Its fighters became known in English as guerrillas.
Yeah. Is that where
Britain's Royal Navies?
Is this where it was like first coined, that term? Because I mean, I've heard of like guerrilla warfare, like when the U.S. went to Vietnam. That was obviously like a big thing. The Vietnamese were really good at hit and run tactics of like using the terrain to their advantage.
Supplied vital weapons, stores and money, often landing them behind enemy lines. Much of Spain's rugged countryside fell under the control of the guerrillas. North of Madrid, Juan Martín Díez, an ex-soldier known as El Empecinado, the Stubborn, led a guerrilla band 6,000 strong.
Holy, that's a lot.
In Navarre, Esposimina, a former peasant, ran a highly organized band that caused havoc for the French, capturing convoys and couriers on the strategic Burgos-Bayonne road, and branding Viva Mina on the forehead of collaborators. While in the west, Julian Sanchez, known as El Charro, led the self-styled Lanceros de Castilla. El Charro himself wore a French hussar's cap, its eagle symbolically turned upside down.
Wow.
There were
He's
dozens more
trolling
bands operating across Spain, though a few were no better than bandits, terrorizing civilians as often as the enemy. The guerrilla war was merciless, marked by hideous atrocities on both sides. A French soldier's greatest fear was to be taken alive by the guerrillas, who often tortured their prisoners before killing them. Tens of thousands of French troops were tied down by this people's war, guarding outposts or patrolling the countryside.
Yeah, and as we know from me being a U.S. citizen from the conflicts in Afghanistan, if you have an insurgency or, people taking up arms against you, it's not so easy to win because it's not like you're lining up against them on a, open field and you're using your maybe superior technology or your superior numbers. This is much harder. Like these people are hiding in the woods and ravines and they blend in with the normal people walking around doing their own thing, and farming. So it's like, how do you even fight them?
The roads were so dangerous for French messengers that they required cavalry escorts of 200 men or more. Many still didn't get through. Their valuable dispatches forwarded to Wellington, for whom they became an invaluable source of intelligence. The war in Spain would ultimately cost the lives of 240,000 French soldiers.
Dang.
As was typical in wars of this era, most died from disease. But more died fighting guerrillas than in battle against the British and Spanish armies.
Really?
However, it was the twin threat, a well-led regular army under Wellington and a popular insurgency, that left the French facing an impossible strategic dilemma. If their armies remained dispersed to fight the guerrillas, Wellington could attack. But if they concentrated to defeat Wellington in battle, huge swathes of the country would quickly fall to the guerrillas. This was Napoleon's Vietnam, or his bleeding ulcer, as he called it.
Yeah.
A war that cost his empire an average of 100 casualties every day, with little prospect of victory. And in 1812, as Napoleon launched his gigantic invasion of Russia, Wellington and the guerrillas launched their own offensive that would turn the war in Spain on its head.
Okay. This is getting crazy. Like what? Yeah, like they were saying, like Napoleon's Vietnam, right? And I was saying earlier about Vietnam. For the U.S., that was, I mean, it was a very tough conflict, obviously, for multiple reasons. One of the biggest, though, in terms of when you're fighting an enemy that knows you're in their territory, they know the land better than you, and they have a sort of zealous, mindset to defend their home. It's very difficult to break that. The only thing, you can obviously employ different strategies. A couple of them are the hearts and minds thing, where you try to win them over, which we've seen in previous videos did not work well in Egypt at all for Napoleon. Or, there's the brutality of just destroying them, which can work, but also backfire on you. If you're just killing every single person you see, or, you're having these mass executions, that's not going to win you people to your side, especially neutral countries, neutral people. So this is really tough for the French, and got to give it to the Spanish and the Portuguese, though. They really put in some work. They're defending their land. They're defending their families, their farms. They're showing the French that, hey, this isn't going to be just a cakewalk. You can walk up in here and just take over. So I'm really interested to see how this whole situation for Napoleon turns out, especially since he's off in Europe and doing other things, So how is he going to balance those two? I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Thank you to Epic History. Everybody who works on the channel, helps them with the art, the music. Thank you to everybody who subscribed to me. I appreciate that, of course. And any comments, I love that. Let me know about anything you know about this conflict right here. Anything I brought up, anything you want to bring up. And I'll just keep plugging away at these, and we'll see you next one. Thanks, guys. Have a great one. Stay safe. Peace.